On the day my father passed away, all his assets, the company, the mansion, the yacht, fell into the hands of my stepmother and my two half-siblings. My share? Just an envelope containing a one-way plane ticket to France. They mocked me, saying it was my father's way of banishing me from the family. But they didn't know that the ticket was the key to a truth buried for nearly 30 years, and it would lead to a confrontation none of them could have anticipated. Hello, my name is Samson Chandler. I'm 31 years old, living in New York, working as a social activist, a job I love, though it never brings in much money. People often say I have a melancholic look in my eyes, as if I'm carrying an untold story. Perhaps they're right. My story began in my childhood, in a wealthy but cold family where I never truly belonged. I grew up in the Chandler Mansion, an opulent estate in the heart of New York with its chilling marble walls and endless corridors. My father, Theodore Chandler, was a notorious real estate tycoon, a man whose name alone inspired awe or fear. He was tall with a booming voice, but his eyes were always fixed on numbers, contracts, and skyscrapers. To him, family was just a small piece of the grand puzzle of his career. I, his eldest son, never found a place at the center of that puzzle. I still remember the mornings in the mansion, when sunlight filtered through expensive silk curtains, illuminating a long dining table adorned with silver tableware. But the warmth of the sunlight could never thaw the coldness of that room. My father sat at the head of the table, flipping through financial newspapers, occasionally glancing at me with indifference. "Eat your breakfast, Samson," he'd say, his voice devoid of emotion, as if I were just another item on his to-do list. When I was 5, everything changed forever. My father remarried Victoria, a sharp-witted woman from a well-off family. With her perfectly styled blonde hair and tightly pursed lips, Victoria stormed into our lives like a hurricane. She quickly took control of the household, turning the Chandler Mansion into her own domain. To her, I wasn't Theodore's son, but an obstacle, a relic from a past she wanted to erase. I felt it in every cold glance, every cutting remark she directed at me. Victoria and my father had 2 children, Damien, 6 years younger than me, and Chloe, 8 years younger. Damien was an arrogant, spoiled boy who believed he was the rightful heir to the Chandler empire. He had my father's eyes, but instead of cold detachment, Damien's gaze was filled with smugness. Chloe, on the other hand, was smothered with her mother's overprotection. She grew up pampered, always joining her brother in mocking me. "Samson, why are you always so quiet? Doesn't anyone want to play with you?" Chloe would giggle, her voice sweet but laced with malice, while Damien stood beside her, arms crossed, smirking triumphantly. I lived in that mansion, but I felt like an uninvited guest. The lavish parties, the family meetings, they were never for me. I often sat alone in my spacious upstairs room, gazing out at the meticulously tended garden, wondering why I was there. On the rare occasions my father was home, I tried to connect with him, but he was always busy, always distracted by a phone call or a more important meeting. "Don't bother me, Samson," he'd say curtly, and I would retreat silently, carrying a fresh wound in my heart. The most painful question was about my biological mother. No one in the family spoke of her, as if she had never existed. I only knew she left when I was very young, but the reason remained a mystery. Whenever I asked my father, "Who was my mother?" he would snap. "Don't ask unnecessary questions," he'd shout, his eyes blazing with anger. Once, when I pressed further, he slammed his hand on the table, making me flinch. "Enough, Samson. You don't need to know." From then on, I buried the question deep inside, but it festered like an unhealed wound. I grew up in loneliness, starved for affection. Victoria doted on Damien and Chloe, showering them with hugs, praise, and gifts I never received. "Damien, you'll take over your father's company one day," she'd say, stroking his hair while I sat at the corner of the table, quietly eating my dinner. Chloe was given dazzling dresses, ballet lessons, and treated like a princess. And me? I was a shadow in that house, an existence they deliberately ignored. But I didn't break. I learned to be independent early on. At school, I threw myself into studying, not to please my father, but to prove I didn't need anyone's pity. I earned a scholarship to college, choosing to study social work, a field my father deemed useless and unworthy of the Chandler name. "What are you going to do with that career? Charity work?" he once asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I didn't respond, just lowered my head, but inside I was resolved. I would live my own life, dependent on no one. At 21, I left the Chandler mansion and rented a small apartment in Brooklyn. It was cramped, with peeling walls and a lingering musty smell, but for the first time I felt free. I worked part-time, continued my studies, and began my journey as a social activist. I helped the homeless, orphans, and those I saw myself in, people forgotten by the world. The work didn't pay much, but it gave me purpose, something I never found in the Chandler mansion. My life went on, quiet but not entirely peaceful. I stayed in touch with my father, though only through brief calls or awkward holiday visits. He never asked about my work, and I didn't expect him to understand. Victoria, Damien, and Chloe all but cut contact, except when they wanted to brag about their wealth or extravagant vacations. I didn't resent them, but each time I heard Chloe's laughter or Damien's arrogant remarks over the phone, my heart ached, as if an old wound had been reopened. Then one day, everything fell apart. I received a call from the hospital on a cold, rainy afternoon. The voice on the other end trembled. Mr. Theodore Chandler passed away from a heart attack at his office. I stood frozen, the phone slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. My father, the invincible man I both feared and resented, was gone. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurting, but because I didn't know how to feel. All I could think was, he's gone, and I never truly knew him. My father's funeral was as extravagant as the Chandler family's style. Powerful figures from the business world filled the room, expensive flowers piled high, and Victoria stood there, tears streaming down her perfect face. Damien and Chloe, though trying to remain composed, couldn't hide the unease in their eyes. And I stood in a corner, silent, like a stranger at my own father's funeral. My father's death marked the end of his golden era, but it also opened a new, bitter chapter. I didn't know that just days later I would be thrust into an inheritance battle where once again I was pushed to the sidelines. Deep down, I clung to a naive hope that my father, no matter how cold, still saw me as his son. But I was wrong. On the day the will was read, I stood in front of the mirror in my small Brooklyn apartment, adjusting the frayed collar of my shirt. I didn't own the expensive suits Damien wore or the polished shoes my father had favored. All I had was myself and a faint hope that today my father would leave me something. Not money, but a sign, a confirmation that I was still his son, even though for 31 years I had never truly felt it. The lawyer's office was in the heart of Manhattan, in a gleaming glass building where everything exuded power and wealth. As I stepped inside, the chill of the air conditioning hit my face, mingling with the scent of expensive perfume and polished wood. The Chandler family was already gathered. Victoria sat at the head of the table, poised like a queen, dressed in immaculate black but still radiant as if she'd just stepped out of a gala. Damien, in a perfectly tailored suit, sat beside his mother, his gaze sliding over me as if I were a waiter who'd wandered in by mistake. Chloe, in a gray silk dress, fiddled with her phone, her red lipsticked mouth curling slightly when she glanced at me. I took a seat at the far end of the table, as far away as possible, silent as a ghost. No one greeted me. No one looked at me for more than a fleeting second. The lawyer, Mr. Harris, a thin man with gold-rimmed glasses, entered with a thick stack of documents. He cleared his throat, adjusted the microphone on the table, and began reading the will in a monotonous tone, as if it were just a tedious formality. But for me, every word he spoke was a dagger, though I didn't yet know how sharp they would cut. Mr. Theodore Chandler, before his passing, bequeathed the entirety of his shares in Chandler Enterprises, including all related assets, to Mrs. Victoria Chandler. Mr. Harris paused, glancing at Victoria. She gave a faint smile, her hands clasped tightly on the table as if she'd known this was coming all along. Damien smirked, his eyes gleaming with smug satisfaction. Chloe stopped playing with her phone, looked up and flashed a radiant smile. I sat there, my heart pounding. I hadn't expected much. I'd never dreamed of skyscrapers or million-dollar bank accounts. But I hoped, even if just for a small keepsake, a token, anything to show that my father had thought of me, that I wasn't just a mistake in his life. Mr. Harris continued. The Manhattan Mansion, the yacht Serenity, the car collection and other assets in the United States and abroad will be transferred to Mrs. Victoria Chandler, along with custody and management of the assets for her 2 children, Damien Chandler and Chloe Chandler, until they come of age to inherit. The room was silent, but I could sense the quiet triumph. Damien tapped the table lightly as if celebrating. Chloe leaned toward her mother, whispering something, and they both giggled. I lowered my head, trying to keep my breathing steady. The will hasn't mentioned me yet, I thought. There has to be something. Surely. Finally, Mr. Harris looked at me, his eyes devoid of emotion. As for Samson Chandler, he paused, flipping a page as if double-checking. My heart seemed to stop. The room turned toward me, not with concern but with curiosity, as if waiting for the climax of a play. Mr. Theodore Chandler left Samson Chandler an envelope currently held at this office, Mr. Harris said, his voice still flat. He reached under the table and produced an old brown envelope sealed with red wax. An assistant stepped forward and placed it in front of me. The envelope was thin, unremarkable, but it felt heavy in my hands, as if it held my entire fate. I stared at it, not daring to open it immediately. Victoria tilted her head, her gaze icy but her lips curling into an enigmatic smile. Damien crossed his arms, watching me with amusement, as if I were a trapped animal. Chloe covered her mouth, stifling a laugh. "Open it, Samson," she said, her voice sweet but dripping with mockery. "I bet it's something really special." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my hands from trembling. I tore open the envelope slowly, as if delaying the moment, though I knew it wouldn't bring anything good. Inside was a one-way plane ticket to Paris, a scrap of paper with an address written in my father's firm handwriting, and an old yellowed photograph. I picked up the photo, my heart tightening. It showed a beautiful, elegant woman with deep, soulful eyes and a gentle smile. She wore a long dress, standing in front of an ancient building, perhaps a European manor. I had never seen her, but something in her eyes felt strangely familiar. "That's it," Damien burst out laughing, his voice echoing through the room. "A plane ticket? Father sure knew how to get rid of you." He turned to Chloe and they both laughed as if they'd heard the funniest joke of their lives. Chloe clapped her hands, adding, "Guess Father thought you'd be better off as a waiter in Paris than here, Samson." Victoria didn't laugh, but her lips twitched upward, her eyes cold as ice. "Samson has received his share," she said softly but sharply, like a thin blade. "Theodore always knew how to arrange things." My face burned, blood rushing to my head. Humiliation surged in my chest like a wave threatening to drown me. All the years I'd struggled, teaching myself, earning scholarships, living independently, trying to prove I didn't need anyone's pity, were erased by a single plane ticket. My father, the man I'd hoped would look at me with even a shred of pride, had left me a cruel farewell. Leave this family, leave the life I never truly belonged to. I wanted to scream, to slam my fist on the table, to demand of my father, though he was no longer here. Why did you do this to me? What did I do wrong? But I did nothing. I sat there, clutching the ticket, trying to keep my breathing steady. I couldn't let them see me break. I couldn't give them another reason to mock me. "Thank you," I said, my voice hoarse, almost a whisper. I stood, the envelope in hand, and walked out of the room. Damien and Chloe's laughter echoed behind me, each burst like a knife slicing into my heart. Victoria said nothing, but her cold, triumphant gaze seemed to say I'd finally been cast out of their world. I stepped out of the building, the frigid Manhattan air slapping my face. I stood on the sidewalk, watching the rush of people and cars, feeling as if the world were spinning around me. The plane ticket in my hand was no longer just a piece of paper. It was a verdict, a final rejection from my father. I wanted to tear it apart, to throw it into the gutter, but I couldn't. Something inside me, a faint instinct, told me this ticket wasn't just an insult. It was a door, though I didn't yet know where it led. I wondered, "Father, what did you want me to do? Why Paris? Who is this woman?" But deep down I knew that this ticket, though a humiliation, was also the key to a new journey. I didn't know where it would lead, but I decided to take the step. Not for my father, not for the Chandler family, but for myself. To uncover the truth, to discover my true worth. I returned to my small Brooklyn apartment after the will reading, the plane ticket and the photograph of the woman still tucked in my jacket pocket, weighing heavily as if carrying an entire world I didn't yet understand. My apartment, with its worn-out armchair and rickety wooden table, was the only place I felt safe, though it never truly felt like home. I threw myself into the chair, staring out the window where the city lights flickered through a veil of misty rain. New York pulsed with life as always, but I felt like an outsider pushed out of its flow. The only question haunting me was, why? Why had my father treated me this way? He'd spent his life building an empire, leaving everything. The Manhattan mansion, the lavish yacht, to Victoria, Damien, and Chloe. And me, his eldest son, was left with a one-way plane ticket to Paris, a photograph, and an unclear address. Was this his final goodbye? A way to banish me as Damien had mocked? Or a cruel joke, a reminder that I never truly belonged to the Chandler family? I tucked the envelope into a desk drawer, trying to return to my daily routine. I went to work, met with the homeless people I helped, organized fundraisers for orphans. Work had always been where I found meaning, where I could forget my emotional wounds. But this time, things were different. Each night, returning to my apartment, I felt a growing void in my chest. I couldn't stop thinking about the ticket, the woman in the photograph, the address written in my father's firm handwriting. They were like pieces of a puzzle I didn't know how to solve. Meanwhile, the Chandler family wouldn't let me be. Victoria, Damien, and Chloe seemed determined to turn my pain into their entertainment. I got notifications from social media where Chloe posted a photo of them in the mansion captioned, "New memories begin. Now it's our time." Damien was even bolder, sharing a post with his usual arrogance. "Someone got a ticket to Paris, probably about to become a street artist," followed by a string of laughing emojis. I read those words, my hand tightening around my phone, the humiliation from the will reading surging back, burning hot. I wanted to lash out, to scream that I didn't need their pity or their mockery, but I didn't. I just turned off my phone, tossed it onto the table, and tried to breathe. One night, the loneliness felt heavier than ever. I sat in my apartment, the dim light from the desk lamp casting shadows on the peeling walls. Outside, rain pattered softly, blending with distant car horns. I felt like a drifting boat, with no shore, no destination. I thought of the envelope as if it were calling me from the drawer. I stood, opened it, and pulled out the envelope, placing it on the table. The plane ticket was still there, next to the photograph of the woman with her deep, soulful eyes. I flipped over the paper with the address, about to put it back, when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the back, in shaky handwriting, unlike my father's firm script on the front, were a few words. "If you want to know the truth, go." I froze, reading the words over and over as if they might vanish if I blinked. Was this my father's message, or just another way for him to control me even from beyond the grave? I picked up the photograph, staring into the woman's eyes. There was a quiet sadness in them, as if she were waiting for me somewhere across the ocean. I didn't know who she was, but I felt an invisible thread connecting me to her, to Paris, to the secrets my father had kept hidden my entire life. I sat there for hours, the ticket in hand, wrestling with myself. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to stay in New York and continue the life I'd built. But another part, deeper and more insistent, whispered that this was my only chance to find answers. About my father, about the truth, about myself. I'd spent my life in the shadow of unanswered questions. I couldn't go on like that. The next morning, I called my manager at the social organization requesting time off. "I need to handle some personal matters," I said, my voice calm though my heart raced. I began packing. A small suitcase, a few clothes, and a notebook where I jotted down my thoughts. I stood before the mirror, looking into my tired eyes, and whispered, "You have to do this. Not for anyone else, but for you." I held the plane ticket, staring at it for a long time. The flight number, date, time, destination, all clear, but its meaning was as foggy as mist. "Paris," I murmured, as if saying it aloud would bring clarity. I didn't know what I'd find there, but I knew if I didn't go, I'd live with regret forever. A few days later, I stood at JFK Airport amid the bustling crowd. The loudspeaker announced the boarding call for the flight to Paris. I dragged my suitcase through security, feeling as if I were stepping into another world. A strange mix of fear, hope, and something like excitement churned inside me. I knew this trip might lead to nothing but disappointment. The address could point to an empty house, the photograph just a meaningless keepsake. As the plane took off, I looked out the small window, watching New York's lights fade into the night. It was the city that had raised me, but also where I'd always felt lost. I closed my eyes, letting the hum of the engines fill my mind. The flight lasted nearly 8 hours, but to me it felt like an entire lifetime. As the plane touched down at Charles de Gaulle Airport, the soft morning light of Paris bathed everything in a gentle glow. I dragged my small suitcase through the bustling crowd, feeling like a stranger in an unfamiliar world. The melodic chatter of French surrounded me, and the signs filled with accents and diacritics overwhelmed my senses. I pulled the scrap of paper with the address from my pocket, rereading my father's handwritten note. Rue de Varennes, number 12, Paris. No name, no hint, just a bare address. I hailed a taxi and handed the paper to the driver, a middle-aged man with a friendly smile. "Rue de Varennes, eh? Nice neighborhood," he said in English with a French accent, then pressed the gas. The taxi glided through cobblestone streets, past elegant old buildings with ornate wrought iron balconies. Paris unfolded like a painting, both luxurious and mysterious, but I was in no mood to admire it. My heart pounded, partly from anticipation, partly from fear. What if this address led to an empty house? What if the photograph was just my father's cruel joke? I clenched my fists, trying to push away the negative thoughts. "Just keep going," I told myself. "You've come this far." The taxi stopped in front of a large iron gate, behind which stood an ancient manor with moss-covered stone walls and towering windows. A brass plaque engraved with the name Devereaux glinted in the sunlight. I froze, feeling as if time had stopped. Devereaux. The name meant nothing to me, yet it carried a strange weight, as if I'd just touched a forgotten piece of myself. I took a deep breath and pressed the bell beside the gate. Its chime echoed through the silent, sprawling courtyard. Moments later, the iron gate creaked open. I pulled my suitcase along the gravel path, the crunching sound under its wheels leading me toward the main house. The heavy wooden door of the manor cracked open just as I reached the steps, and a woman stepped out. She was in her 50s, her silver hair neatly pinned up, her face still bearing traces of elegance and grace. She wore a thin sweater and a long skirt, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. When her eyes met mine, she froze, as if seeing a ghost from the past. I fumbled, pulling the photograph from my jacket pocket and holding it up, my heart nearly stopping. The woman in the picture, with her deep, soulful eyes and gentle smile, was her, though time had etched lines on her face. "I'm Samson Chandler," I said, my voice hoarse with nerves. "My father, Theodore Chandler, left me this address, and this photograph." I handed her the photo, my hand trembling slightly. She looked at the picture, then at me, her eyes suddenly brimming with tears. "Samson," she whispered, her voice quivering as if the name were a prayer. Then, without another word, she stepped forward and enveloped me in a tight embrace. I stood there, stunned, not understanding what was happening. The warmth of her arms enveloped me, a sensation both foreign and achingly familiar. I wanted to push her away, to demand who she was, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, letting her hold me, her tears soaking into my shoulder. "You're my Samson," she said, her voice choked with emotion, her hand gently stroking my hair. "You've come back." I stepped back, staring at her, my mind reeling. "Mother?" I repeated, as if the word were too heavy to speak. "What are you saying? Why are you calling yourself my mother?" She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I am Marianne Devereaux," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I am your mother, Samson. I've been waiting for you for 30 years. I didn't know how to respond. I dreamed of this moment my entire life, meeting my mother, knowing who she was. But now that it was happening, I felt only a strange emptiness. I followed her inside, stepping through marble-floored hallways adorned with ancient paintings, the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. We sat in a grand living room where a fire crackled in the hearth and velvet-upholstered chairs glowed red. Marianne held my hand as if afraid I'd vanish if she let go. She began to speak, her voice slow, each word carrying the weight of old pain. "Your father, Theodore, and I were deeply in love," she said, her eyes distant as if gazing into a lost time. "Back then, he was just a poor young man full of ambition but with nothing but dreams. I came from the Devereaux family, a powerful lineage in France. My family despised him, called him a gold digger, unworthy of me. They pressured us, threatened us, did everything to tear us apart." I listened, my heart heavy. I'd never imagined my father, the cold, powerful man, as a struggling young man in love with a woman he couldn't reach. Marianne continued, her voice trembling. "We tried, Samson. I was pregnant with you and we thought love would conquer all. But the pressure from my family was too much. Theodore grew distant, bitter, resentful. Then one day he disappeared and took you with him." I felt the blood rush to my face, a mix of anger and pain surging within me. "Took me?" I echoed, my voice breaking. "What did he do?" Marianne stood and walked to an antique wooden cabinet, retrieving a small box. She opened it and pulled out a yellowed letter, my father's handwriting unmistakable. "He left this," she said, handing it to me. "I've kept it for 30 years, a reminder that you were still out there somewhere." My hands shook as I took the letter. My father's words were brief but sharp. "Marianne, I can't live in the shadow of your family. I'm taking Samson to give him a new life. Don't look for us." I read it over and over, each word cutting like a blade. My father had stolen me from my mother without explanation, without giving her a chance to find me. My lonely childhood in America, the years of disdain from Victoria, Damien, and Chloe. It was only half the truth. The other half was here in this manner, in the tear-filled eyes of the woman before me. "How have you lived, Samson?" Marianne asked, her voice gentle but laced with pain. "Tell me." I took a deep breath and everything poured out like a river breaking through a dam. I told her about the Chandler mansion where I was an uninvited guest. About Victoria with her cold stares and cutting words. About Damien and Chloe, my half-siblings, who treated me as an outsider. About my father, the man I both feared and resented, who never answered my questions about my mother. And about the will, the plane ticket, the humiliation in the lawyer's office. I spoke, and tears streamed down my face despite my efforts to hold them back. Marianne listened, never interrupting, only holding my hand tightly. When I finished, she pulled me into her arms, hugging me fiercely. "I'm sorry, Samson," she whispered. "I'm sorry I didn't find you sooner. But from today, you'll never be alone again. I promise." For the first time in my life, I felt the warmth of a mother's love, something I'd longed for since childhood, something I thought existed only in dreams. I hugged her back, letting my tears fall freely, and in that moment I knew I had found a part of myself, a part I'd lost long ago. The days that followed at the Devereux Manor passed like a dream I feared would vanish if I blinked. My mother, Marianne, was always by my side, guiding me through the grand hallways of the house, showing me the ancient paintings on the walls, the family heirlooms preserved through generations. She spoke of the Devereux family's history, a powerful lineage in France with intricate ties to finance and politics. But above all, she spoke of me, of the days she carried me, of the nights she wept thinking of the son stolen from her. Each word she spoke was a blade, both painful and healing, as if she were stitching together the wounds I'd carried for 31 years. One morning, as Paris's sunlight filtered through the tall windows, my mother took my hand, her eyes gleaming with a newfound determination. "Samson, it's time for you to meet the Devereux family," she said, her voice gentle but resolute. "They need to know who you are, and you need to know you belong here." I swallowed hard, a wave of anxiety rising in my chest. "Will they accept me, Mother?" I asked, my voice low. I was all too familiar with rejection, with being pushed to the sidelines. The thought of facing a new family, a powerful lineage, made me feel like an outsider once again. She squeezed my hand, her eyes blazing like fire. "You are my flesh and blood, Samson. No one can deny that. I won't let anyone hurt you again." Her words, strong and unwavering, were like a shield protecting me, and I nodded, though doubt still flooded my heart. That afternoon, we rode in a sleek black car through the streets of Paris to an ancient chateau on the outskirts, where the Devereux family held their gatherings. The chateau loomed before me like a scene from a bygone century, with towering spires, moss-covered stone walls, and a sprawling, meticulously tended garden. As I stepped out of the car, I felt the weight of the place, not just its architecture, but its history, its power, and the expectations I wasn't sure I could meet. Marianne led me through the grand gates into a main hall with soaring ceilings and ornate wall frescoes. The Devereux family was already assembled, about 24 people, from young men and women in elegant suits and dresses to elders exuding stately authority. At the center of the room were my grandparents, Jacques and Elise Devereux, both in their 70s but radiating an aura of power. Jacques, with his white hair and piercing eyes, sat in a large armchair, while Elise, with a subtle smile and hands adorned with jewelry, stood beside him. Marianne introduced me, her voice clear and unwavering. "This is Samson Chandler, my son, and your grandson." The room fell silent save for the crackling of the fireplace. I felt every eye on me, some curious, some skeptical, and some almost hostile. Jacques raised an eyebrow, his gaze sweeping over me from head to toe as if appraising a piece of merchandise. Elise tilted her head, her lips pursed, saying nothing. "Your son?" Jacques said, his voice deep and cold. "You say this is the child Theodore took? How do we know he's truly a Devereux?" My face flushed, not with anger, but with the familiar sting of doubt. But before I could respond, my mother stepped forward, standing like a wall between me and them. "Samson is my son," she said, her voice sharp yet composed. "I lost him for 30 years because of this family's mistakes. I won't let anyone deny him again. If you need proof, I'm ready for a DNA test right now." The room grew tense, as if a storm were about to break. Jacques stared at her, his gaze softening slightly but still stern. Elise stepped forward, placing a hand on her husband's shoulder and whispering something. Finally, Jacques nodded. "Very well," he said. "We'll do the test. But if he's not our blood, Marianne, you know the consequences." I stood there, feeling like a defendant in a courtroom, but my mother turned to me, her gentle smile reassuring me she wouldn't let me face this alone. In that moment, I realized that whatever the outcome, I had her, and no one could take that away. A few days later, the DNA test results arrived. I sat in the manor's living room beside my mother when an assistant brought a white envelope. Marianne opened it, scanned the contents, and turned to me, tears glistening in her eyes. "You are my son, Samson," she said, her voice choked with emotion. 99.9% confirmed. You are part of this family." Jacques and Elise were summoned soon after. As they read the results, I saw Jacques' expression shift from skepticism to a rare trace of emotion. He stood, approached me, and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Samson," he said, his voice softer now, "we were wrong to let you go. Back then, we pressured Marianne and Theodore, and we paid the price by losing you. Now we want to make amends." Elise, her eyes red, embraced me. "You are our grandson," she whispered. "We'll do everything to make you feel you belong here." For the first time, I felt a recognition I'd never known, not from my father, not from Victoria, but from people I hadn't even known days before. That night, the Devereux family held a welcome banquet for me at the chateau. The long table was draped in white silk, candlelight shimmering on wine glasses. My mother sat beside me, her eyes shining with pride, her hand occasionally brushing mine as if to remind me she was there. The family's reactions varied. Some younger members, like my cousin Antoine, shook my hand with genuine smiles. "Welcome home, Samson," he said warmly. But there were also cautious glances from others, whispered conversations behind my back. I knew not everyone was ready to accept a stranger like me, but my mother's unwavering love and resolve silenced any open opposition. I sat there amidst the clinking wine glasses and French conversations I could only half understand, feeling both disoriented and warmed. Just weeks ago, I was a despised outsider in the Chandler family, living in a cramped Brooklyn apartment with nothing but my work and unanswered questions. Now I was in Paris, embraced by my birth mother, recognized by a powerful lineage. A spark of hope began to flicker within me. A hope for a new beginning, a life where I was no longer a shadow but part of something greater. The days at the Devereux Manor passed like a gentle dream. Each moment with my mother, my grandparents, and my newly met cousins acting like a balm for old wounds. I began to learn, albeit awkwardly, to fit into the world of the Devereux family. The elegant dinner parties, the conversations about finance and art, and the glances that grew warmer as they looked at me. But just as I started to feel I belonged, a shadow from my past pulled me back. One afternoon, as I sat in the manor's library flipping through an old book about the family's history, my phone buzzed. A video call from an unfamiliar number in the US. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen, unsure whether to answer. Curiosity won out. I pressed accept, and Victoria's face appeared more haggard than I'd ever seen. Her once golden hair was disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed, devoid of the haughty poise of the woman who had sat with crossed legs in the lawyer's office, smirking as I received the plane ticket. "Samson," she said, her voice trembling, almost pleading. "I need to talk to you." I sat up straight, a chill running down my spine. "What's this about, Victoria?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though a storm of emotions churned inside me. I had never called her mother, and now, after everything, the word felt even more foreign. She took a deep breath as if summoning courage. Everything's fallen apart, Samson," she said, her voice breaking. "Theodore's assets, the company, the mansion, the yacht, the cars, they were all mortgaged to cover massive debts. His final business deals before he died all failed. We've lost everything." I went still, not out of surprise, but because of the irony. The Chandler family, who had mocked me, who had flaunted their wealth, now stood on the brink of ruin. I pictured the Manhattan mansion where I'd been treated like an uninvited guest, now sealed, its precious wooden doors locked tight. The yacht Serenity, my father's pride, likely repossessed at some harbor. The supercars, once symbols of extravagance, gone. But I didn't feel vindicated, only a strange emptiness. Damien and Chloe, they're falling apart, Victoria continued, her voice faltering. Damien can't sleep, drinks all day. Chloe's crying constantly, doesn't know what to do. We've lost everything, Samson. I know you've been hurt, but you're the eldest, Theodore's son. You can't turn your back on family. My hand clenched, anger and pain surging together. Family? The word sounded so alien coming from her. All those years in the Chandler mansion treated as a burden. Mocked and sidelined by her and my half-siblings. Not once had they called me family. Now with everything crumbling, they turned to me as if I were their only salvation. "I have nothing to offer, Victoria," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "I'm just a social worker living in a small Brooklyn apartment. Father left me nothing but a plane ticket. You know that better than anyone." Victoria shook her head, her eyes sharpening as if grasping at a final thread of hope. "Don't say that, Samson. I know about your mother, Marianne Devereaux. When I married Theodore, he told me about her powerful family in France. I know you've gone there, that you've found her. That means you have a wealthy family backing you, don't you? You have to help us. Damien and Chloe are still your siblings, whether you admit it or not." Her words cut like a knife, not because of their truth, but because of their audacity. She had known about my mother, about the Devereaux family from the moment she met my father, yet never mentioned it. Now, with everything lost, she used that truth to manipulate me. I wanted to scream, to tell her I owed them nothing, that the years of disdain couldn't be erased by a desperate call. But I said nothing. I just stared at her, letting the silence speak for me. "Samson, please," Victoria whispered, her voice now almost begging. "We have no one else." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I'll think about it," I said, though I knew I wasn't promising anything. I ended the call, the phone screen going dark, leaving me in the quiet of the Devereaux Manor's library. I looked out the window where Paris's soft sunlight bathed the garden, but inside me a storm raged. I recounted the entire call to my mother that evening as we sat by the fireplace, its crackling flames casting light across her face. Marianne listened, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes calm but piercing. When I mentioned that Victoria knew about her, about the Devereaux family, my mother's brow furrowed slightly as if old memories were stirring. I paused, waiting for her reaction, fearing the story might hurt her. But she only placed her hand on mine, her voice gentle yet firm. "Samson," she said, "those people have hurt you for years. They have no right to demand that you save them. But if you want to face them, to close the chapter on your past, I'll always be by your side." Her words were like a breeze clearing the fog in my mind. I realized that despite having found my mother and a new family, the shadow of the Chandler family still haunted me. I couldn't keep living with it, couldn't let those old wounds continue to bleed. I nodded, looking into her eyes. "I want to go back, Mother," I said, my voice steadier than ever. "I want to see them one last time, to say goodbye, not for them, but for me." Marianne smiled, her eyes sparkling with pride. "Then we'll go," she said. "You'll never have to face them alone again." A few days later, we boarded a flight back to New York. As the plane landed at JFK, I felt the familiar chill of the city, but this time, it didn't make me tremble. My mother was beside me, her presence like a shield, making me feel stronger than ever. We rented a car and drove straight to the Chandler mansion, the place that had once symbolized extravagance, where I'd lived as an outcast. When we arrived, I barely recognized the house. The Chandler mansion, with its marble walls and grand windows, now looked cold and dilapidated. The iron gate was locked, sealed signs plastered on the doors, and the once meticulously tended garden was overgrown with weeds. The staff who had once silently served the family were gone. I stood at the gate, feeling as if I were looking at a dead memory. When I rang the bell, Victoria opened the gate, her appearance so haggard it stunned me. Her once golden hair was disheveled, her face bare of its usual flawless makeup, and her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying for days. Damien and Chloe stood behind her, both mere shadows of their former selves. Damien in a crumpled suit, his eyes filled with anger and confusion. Chloe, without her red lipstick or haughty smile, had swollen eyes and trembling hands. "Samson," Victoria said, her voice hoarse, forcing a weak smile. When she saw Marianne beside me, her face stiffened, as if realizing she was facing an adversary she couldn't overcome. "And Mrs. Devereaux," she added, her voice trembling, trying to maintain composure. "Thank you both for coming." Marianne nodded, her gaze cold but polite. "We're here to talk, Victoria," she said, her voice calm but carrying an authority that silenced any interruption. We stepped into the living room, once the heart of lavish parties. Now it was empty, furniture covered in white sheets, some pieces already removed. We sat down, the air heavy as if a storm were brewing. Victoria spoke first, her voice a mix of desperation and lingering pride. "Samson, I know we've had our differences, but we're family. You can't turn your back on us. The company's bankrupt. The mansion's been seized. We have nothing left. You have to help us." Damien cut in, his voice heated, half pleading, half demanding. "You're the eldest, Samson. Father left this empire to us, but it's crumbling. You can't abandon us like this. You have the Devereaux family. You have money. You have to do something." Chloe said nothing. Her head bowed, tears streaming down her face. Finally, she looked up, her voice trembling. "Samson, I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know Damien and I treated you horribly. But please don't abandon us." I sat there, calmly observing them, feeling the bitter irony of the scene. Just months ago, they had mocked me in the lawyer's office, laughing at the plane ticket my father left me. They had been arrogant, basking in their wealth and power, treating me as an outsider. Now they sat before me, haggard and desperate, begging for my help. All the glory they once boasted of was now ashes. I wanted to tell them I owed them nothing, that the years of disdain couldn't be erased by an apology. But I didn't. I just looked at them, letting the silence speak for me. Marianne stood beside me, her presence like a mountain, steadfast and unyielding. She spoke, her voice ringing out, clear and resolute. "Victoria," she said, her gaze piercing my stepmother, making her lower her eyes in silence. "Samson has suffered enough from this family. He owes you nothing. However, out of compassion, the Devereaux family will provide you with a sum of money to start over. But on one condition, you will never contact Samson or bother him again." Victoria's eyes widened, her face a mix of relief and shame. "Thank you, Mrs. Devereaux," she whispered, her voice trembling. Chloe nodded, tears falling again, her lips murmuring thanks. But Damien, clinging to his last shred of pride, sneered, his eyes full of contempt. "We don't need your pity, Samson," he said bitterly. "But if you think this makes you superior, go ahead." I didn't respond. Damien's words no longer had the power to hurt me. I just looked at them, realizing this confrontation wasn't about saving them. It was about freeing myself. I had done what I needed to do, not for them, but to close my past. The meeting ended, leaving behind a broken family stripped of power and wealth. My mother and I left the mansion, stepping out onto the cold Manhattan streets. Before leaving America, we stopped at the cemetery where my father was buried. His grave lay beneath a large oak, the stone marker bearing his name cold and simple. I placed a bouquet of white flowers on it, my heart a tangle of resentment and gratitude. Resentment for the years he left me in solitude, for stealing me from my mother. But gratitude, too, for the plane ticket, a gift that seemed like an insult, but led me to my mother, to the truth, to a new life. Marianne stood beside me, her hand on my shoulder. "He loved me, Samson," she whispered, her eyes on the grave filled with regret. "But he made mistakes. I've forgiven him, and I hope you can find peace too." I nodded, saying nothing. In that moment by my father's grave, I said my final goodbye to the past. I had severed all ties with the Chandler family, opening a new chapter in France, where I was no longer a shadow but a son, a grandson, a part of the Devereaux family. As the plane carried my mother and me back to Paris, I gazed out the window, watching white clouds drift lazily under the pale golden sunlight. New York, with all its pain and memories, now lay behind me, distant like a fading dream. My mother sat beside me, her hand tightly clasping mine, her warmth a reminder that I was no longer alone. Back at the Devereaux Manor, I officially began my new life. The first days passed like a gentle whirlwind, filled with moments I'd never dared to dream of. My mother, Marianne, was always by my side, as if determined to make up for 30 years of separation with every second of the present. She brought me to dinner parties, introducing me to the family's friends and business partners, her eyes sparkling with pride. "This is Samson, my son," she said, her voice ringing with certainty as if declaring to the world that I was an indispensable part of her. My grandparents, Jacques and Elise, didn't stand on the sidelines either. Jacques, with his stately demeanor now softened, often called me to his study to discuss the family's history and the financial empire the Devereaux had built over generations. "You have Devereaux blood in you, Samson," he said, his voice deep but warm. "We're not just a family. We're a legacy." Elise was gentler, often holding my hand as she shared stories of my mother's youth and the dreams she'd had for her daughter and grandson. They actively included me in family events, from meetings in Paris to trips to the countryside where the Devereaux owned ancient estates. One day, Jacques summoned me to the family's main office, a room adorned with ornate wall paintings and oak bookshelves that told a story of power and tradition. He sat behind a large desk, a stack of documents before him. "Samson," he said, his gaze sharp but no longer skeptical. "Our family has a long-standing investment fund, and I want you to be part of it. You can bring a fresh perspective, a different way of thinking. Will you join us?" I froze, not out of fear but out of astonishment. Just months ago, I was a social worker living in a cramped Brooklyn apartment, dismissed by everyone. Now I was being invited into the heart of a prestigious family's power. I nodded, my voice hoarse. "I'll do my best, grandfather." Integrating into the Devereaux world wasn't easy. The lavish dinner parties with their perfectly tailored suits and expensive wine made me feel like an outsider in the early days. I stumbled with my French, often relying on my mother or my cousin Antoine to translate. Family meetings where people debated multi-million-dollar investments or political connections sometimes overwhelmed me. But I learned to listen, to observe, and to find my place. I didn't try to become someone else. I remained Samson with my simple shirt and worn shoes, carrying the humility and resilience forged through years of hardship in America. That sincerity, I realized, began to earn me respect from the family. Antoine, my ever-friendly cousin, said to me during one dinner, "You're not like the others here, Samson. You don't boast or compete, but when you speak, people listen." His words surprised me but boosted my confidence. I started to see that here value came not just from wealth or power, but from wisdom and character, qualities I'd honed through my challenging years in America. During one family meeting, I was asked to share my opinion on a potential investment, a real estate project in southern France. I flipped through the documents, feeling as if I stood at a pivotal crossroads. I wasn't a financial expert like Jacques or Antoine, but I had life experience, knowledge from my years studying law, and work with the marginalized in New York. I stood, my voice slightly trembling but clear. "This project has potential, but the real estate market in that region is unstable," I said, offering analysis based on what I'd seen in America, where my father had failed due to risky ventures. "We should be cautious, considering long-term risks." The room fell silent, all eyes on me. Jacques raised an eyebrow, but this time I saw a subtle smile on his lips. After the meeting, he called me aside, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You have good instincts, Samson," he said. "Keep it up." His brief praise warmed my heart. For the first time, I felt truly valued, not for my name or wealth, but for what I brought to the table. As time passed, I began to achieve small successes. I proposed a strategy to diversify the family's investment portfolio, helping to mitigate some financial risks. Each time I spoke, I saw my mother's eyes light up, as if she were watching the sun she'd lost for so long now shining. Antoine and other cousins started seeking my advice, not just on finance, but on everyday matters. I realized that though I'd once been an outcast, I was becoming an integral part of this family. Paris, with its cobblestone streets and quaint cafes, became my home. I grew to love the city's gentle sunlight, the afternoon walks with my mother along the Seine, and the stories she told of her and my father's youth. Though there were still moments of feeling out of place, When my French faltered or I caught a wary glance from a family member, I was no longer afraid. I had found where I belonged, not through wealth or power, but through my mother's love and the wisdom I'd forged through hardship. One evening, as I stood on the manor's balcony gazing at the moonlit garden, my mother stepped out, draping a coat over my shoulders. "What are you thinking about, Samson?" she asked softly. I smiled, turning to her. "I'm thinking about how far I've come," I said. "From a small apartment in Brooklyn to here, with you, with family. I'm no longer a shadow." She took my hand, her eyes glistening. "You were never a shadow, Samson," she said. "You've been my light since the day you were born." In that moment, I knew that no matter where my journey led, I would never be alone again. I had found my home, not just in the Devereux Manor, but in the hearts of those who loved me. That night, I stood on the balcony of the Devereux Manor, gazing down at the moonlit garden. The gentle Paris night breeze carried the faint scent of lavender from somewhere, and I let my mind drift back to the long journey I'd traveled. From the lonely days in the Chandler mansion, where I was treated as an uninvited guest, to the warm moments with my mother and the Devereux family, I realized my life had transformed in ways I'd never dared to dream. I had gone from a despised, sidelined son to someone cherished, loved, and recognized as part of a powerful yet deeply human family. I sat down, pulling my worn notebook from my jacket pocket, the one where I'd scribbled my thoughts during those solitary nights in Brooklyn. Flipping through its pages, I saw the messy lines of anger, pain, and unanswered questions. But now, looking back, I understood those years weren't wasted. They were trials that forged me, teaching me that a person's worth lies not in inherited wealth or praise, but in resilience, character, and determination. I had once let Victoria's, Damien's, and Chloe's taunts cut into my heart, believing their contempt defined my value. Now I knew their words only had power if I allowed them to bring me down. The story of my mother and father was a painful lesson in the tragedy of class division and pride. My father, a poor young man full of ambition, loved my mother, a daughter of the powerful Devereux family. But her family's scorn and society's pressures fractured their love. My father took me away not just to escape his own pain, but to prove he could build an empire of his own. The cost of that pride was my stolen childhood and the years my mother wept in silence, waiting for a son she didn't know was alive or lost. I realized that class divisions don't just separate people, they leave wounds that never fully heal. From my journey, I drew lessons etched deep in my heart. First, I learned that no one has the right to define my worth. Not my father, not Victoria, not anyone. My value lies in how I face adversity and my perseverance when the world turns its back, in the compassion I offer to those in need. Second, I understood that blood ties and family, though precious, aren't a reason to accept mistreatment. I had once yearned for the Chandler family's recognition, but now I knew true kinship is built on respect and love, not imposition or manipulation. Finally, I realized that sometimes losing is the path to finding where you truly belong. The plane ticket my father left, which seemed like an insult, turned out to be the key to a door that led me to my mother, to the Devereux family, to myself. I want to share this advice with anyone feeling lost, as I once was. Be brave enough to walk away from toxic relationships, even if they're with family. I was once terrified to leave the Chandler mansion, afraid I'd never find where I belonged. But that decision led me to Paris, to my mother, to a new life. Trust that your resilience and integrity will guide you to where you deserve to be. There will be days when you feel alone, as if the world is against you, but remember that every step, no matter how small, is a step toward the light. I closed the notebook, looking up at the star-filled Paris sky. A quiet sense of gratitude welled up within me. I silently thanked my father, not for the years he left me in solitude, but for that plane ticket. What seemed like an insult had become the gateway to a new life, where I was no longer a shadow, but a son, a grandson, a man with purpose and value. I gazed toward the horizon where Paris stretched out with its ancient spires and new dreams. "Thank you, Father," I whispered, not with resentment but with peace. That plane ticket, once a dagger, had become the bridge to myself, and now I was ready to move forward, not as an outcast but as someone who had found his own light.